我宣布，安全理事会第9109次会议现在开始。本次会议的临时议程是对国际和平与安全的威胁。议程通过。根据安理会暂行议事规则第37条，我邀请乌克兰代表参加本次会议，就这样决定。按照安理会暂行议事规则第39条，我邀请国际原子能机构总干事格罗西先生参加本次会议，就这样决定。安全理事会现在开始审议议程项目2。我现在请格罗西先生发言。Do we have the voice? Can we hear you? I don't think we have the sound.
I hope no, you can hear me now. Very well. So I was saying thank you very much, Ambassador Zhang. Mr. President, it is indeed a great pleasure to have this opportunity to brief the Council on the situation at the nuclear facilities in Ukraine. As the Council knows, the IAEA has been actively assessing the situation in these facilities since the conflict began back in February. And you may recall that I had the opportunity to report on the state of affairs to you back in March. Since February 24, the IAEA has activated its Incident and Emergency Center, established regular contact with the Ukrainian authorities, and closely monitored the situation at these facilities, as well as activities involving radioactive sources and nuclear material in Ukraine. I have issued frequent, almost daily, updates on the IAEA website to ensure that everyone has updated information. And I have also personally led 2 missions to provide assistance to Ukraine, one at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant in March, and subsequently a second one to the Chernobyl site in April. The agency has also been coordinating offers of assistance from our member states and facilitated the provision of equipment and radiation, such as personal protection equipment or radiation monitors. In total, up to now, 12 member states have offered assistance. The agency, myself, have been in frequent contact with both Ukraine and the Russian Federation to make sure we have the clearest picture possible of the evolving circumstances at this site. The agency has conducted 9 safeguards missions in Ukraine at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant, the Rivne nuclear power plant, Chmelnytsky nuclear power plant, and the Chernobyl site and Kiev area, which are under IAEA safeguards pursuant to the NPT Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement that the agency has with Ukraine. These on-site inspections have enabled the agency to fulfill its obligatory safeguards objectives. Remote monitoring from IAEA headquarters of other nuclear power plants and the Chernobyl area remain ongoing. Most recently, I have had two teams at the Chernobyl site performing critical safeguards verification activities. The two expert missions to Ukraine, which I have led personally, as I said, allowed us to see for ourselves the situation on the ground and provide technical assistance, which has been already given and it's ongoing. There are, of course, a number of humanitarian, political, and legal issues which are in the remit of the Security Council, but our work, as you know very well, focus exclusively on technical issues related to the safety, the security, and the inspections, the safeguards inspections in Ukraine. Earlier in the year, and I had also an opportunity to recall this just a little more than a week ago when I was addressing the ongoing NPT review conference there in New York, I outlined a number of indispensable pillars, 7 of them, which are cardinal, which are crucial to ensure safety and security. These include, I will not enumerate them all, but they include in general crucial aspects dealing with the physical integrity, obviously, the physical integrity of the plant, the off-site power supply, which, as you know, is indispensable for a nuclear plant for cooling systems to work, emergency preparedness measures and systems, and so on. The thing is that all these 7 pillars have been compromised, if not entirely violated at one point or the other during this ongoing crisis. Legally speaking, when it comes to attacks or the possibility of attacks on nuclear facilities, we are, of course, not working on a vacuum. The international community has taken a stance very early on against this type of thing, and the additional protocols 1 and 2 to the 1949 Geneva Conventions prohibit such attacks against nuclear electrical, as it was said back in the day, generating stations in armed conflict. And on top of that, there have been a number of General Conference resolutions from the IAEA. So all of this is a framework that must be observed. We are all aware, and perhaps this meeting and this briefing takes place against the backdrop of this. Recently, the situation at the nuclear facilities, and in particular at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, have been deteriorating rapidly to the point of becoming very alarming. On 5th August, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was subject to shelling, resulting in several explosions within the site of a nuclear power plant. These explosions took place near the electrical switchboard of a 750 kilowatt external power supply that caused the shutdown of the electrical power transformer and 2 backup transformers. Consequently, 1 reactor unit was shut down and disconnected from the electrical grid. So you can see there is a direct link between these external interventions, attacks, and what's happening at the plant. The emergency protection system of the affected unit was triggered, and diesel generators were set into operation to ensure the power supply of this unit. This unit, as we speak, remains disconnected from the grid. There was also shelling in the area of the nitrogen oxygen station at the plant. Firefighters quickly extinguished this fire. However, repairs must be assessed, evaluated, and done. On August 6, 1 staff member of Zaporizhzhia working in the area of the dry spent nuclear fuel storage facility in the vicinity was injured during a new episode of shelling, which also caused some physical damage. Additionally, Ukraine has reported to us that Zaporizhzhia staff have restricted access to the on-site emergency crisis center. As of today, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has limited availability of off-site power, one external high voltage line and one high voltage backup line to the thermal plant due to the damage of the shelling, from the shelling that I just referred. In particular, I remain very concerned about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and I reiterate that any military action jeopardizing nuclear safety, nuclear security, must stop immediately. These military actions, dear colleagues, near such a large nuclear facility could lead to very serious consequences. Even before these most recent events, I had already expressed great concern about the extremely stressful and difficult conditions faced by the Ukrainian operating staff. The agency continues to monitor the situation to identify any potential implication that could arise at the facilities. Based on the most recent information, IAEA experts have preliminary assessed that there is no immediate threat to nuclear safety as a result of the shelling or other military actions. However, this could change at any moment. We certainly can all agree that any nuclear catastrophe would be unacceptable, and therefore preventing it should be our overarching goal. We must all work together to prevent it. That is our duty. That is our common responsibility. In order to help achieve that, I ask that both sides cooperate with the IAEA and allow for a mission to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to proceed as soon as possible. This huge facility, you are aware, it has been said many times, is currently in Russian-occupied territory, so it cannot be reached by traveling exclusively through Ukrainian-controlled territory. We have worked and we need to work pragmatically with authorities of both countries in efforts to obtain access for our experts to Zaporizhzhia. I am personally ready to lead such a mission as I did for South Ukraine and Chernobyl, leading a team of experts from the IAEA. We have been preparing for this, and time is of the essence. So I propose, I plead to hold this mission as soon as possible, Mr. President. Since the installation has been under the control of Russia, the IAEA has received information from Russia as well as from Ukraine, indicating the state of the facility, its operation, and the damage assessment. However, the contents of such statements are frequently contradictory. And without, I repeat, without a physical presence, the IAEA cannot corroborate some very important facts. It is those facts gathered during a site visit that are needed so that the IAEA may be able to develop and provide an independent assessment of the nuclear safety and security risks. Among other critical activities, what are we intending to do? We would assess the physical damage to the facilities. We will determine whether the main and backup safety and security systems are functional and evaluate the working conditions of the control room staff. The mission to the site will also allow us to perform urgent safeguards activities, verifying the status of the reactors and the inventories of nuclear material, including fresh and spent fuel storage, where we currently have no remote data transfer of surveillance. Furthermore, we need to perform maintenance on all IAEA safeguards equipment in order to ensure the remote data transmission and the maintenance of continuity of knowledge, which is indispensable after leaving the facility. Not only would a mission to Zaporizhzhia be beneficial to the work of the IAEA and to the assessment of the international community of what is going on, but I believe, I am convinced it would be beneficial to the operators and the regulators of the nuclear plant. The previous IAEA missions, which I have mentioned on a couple of occasions, to South Ukraine and Chernobyl, were a proof that being there, establishing the facts, is what is needed at the moment. Overall, I also believe that our on-site presence will both allow us to carry the technical activities that I have just described and also provide a stabilizing influence. I want to underscore that the IAEA has been ready to perform such a mission since June, when we were ready to go. But unfortunately, due to political factors and other considerations, it was not possible. We've seen what has happened over the past 2 months. We cannot allow such factors to delay us any longer. I reiterate that the military actions that have even the smallest potential to jeopardize nuclear safety or nuclear security at such a nuclear installation must stop immediately. These actions could lead us to serious consequences. The IAEA is ready to help avert such an escalation of the crisis. I want to thank the Secretary General, who has been steadfast in his support to our mission. I had an opportunity to discuss with him a few days ago in New York. I have followed his statements of support, without which our work would be tremendously more difficult. And I thank the Security Council for having given me this opportunity to state some facts and to also reiterate that this is a serious hour, great hour, and the IAEA must be allowed to conduct its mission to Zaporizhzhia as soon as possible. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
我感谢格罗西先生刚才所做的通报。现在呢，请安理会成员发言。我现在请俄罗斯代表发言。
Господин председатель, мы признательны генеральному директору МАГАТЭ Рафаэлю Гросси за его брифинг. Господин председатель, мы неоднократно предупреждали наших западных коллег, что если они не образумят киевский режим, то он пойдет на самые чудовищные и безрассудные шаги, последствия которых аукнутся далеко за пределами Украины. К сожалению, именно это сейчас и происходит. Преступные атаки Киева на объекты ядерной инфраструктуры толкают мир на грань ядерной катастрофы, сопоставимой по масштабам с Чернобыльской. В последние дни вооруженные силы Украины неоднократно обстреливали с использованием тяжелой артиллерии и ракетных систем залпового огня крупнейшую атомную электростанцию в Европе – Запорожскую АЭС. Эти удары напрямую угрожают ядерной безопасности станции. 5 августа в результате такого удара поврежден ряд значимых для электро- и газоснабжения ЗАЭС объектов. Разрушены трубопроводы. На распределительном узле произошло возгорание водорода. Выведена из строя высоковольтная линия электропередач. Хочу подчеркнуть, что ВСУ обстреляли станцию во время пересменки персонала. Очевидно, что целью киевского режима было запугать сотрудников Запорожской атомной электростанции, своих же собственных граждан, для того, чтобы помешать их выходу на работу и тем самым подорвать нормальное функционирование этого объекта. 6 августа ВСУ ударили по ЗАЭС с применением кассетных снарядов. Их осколочные боевые элементы поразили площадку в районе сухого хранилища отработавшего ядерного топлива, а также пост автоматизированного контроля радиационной обстановки. Один из сотрудников станции получил ранение. В результате обстрела ВСУ 7 августа произошел резкий скачок напряжения в сети, питающей ЗАЭС. Было повреждено оборудование, что привело к автоматическому отключению линии электропередач. На энергоблоке номер 4, который работал на 10% мощности, отключилось электропитание системы управления защиты АЭС, сработала аварийная защита. Украинский персонал ЗАЭС был вынужден остановить один из 3 работающих энергоблоков, мощность еще 2 снижена до половины максимальной. Массированные удары со стороны ВСУ по окрестностям города Энергодар привели к более чем 40 разрывам линии электропередач и его обесточиванию. Среди жителей Энергодара, многие из которых являются работниками ЗАЭС, есть погибшие и раненые. Особо кощунственным является то, что ряд атак на ЗАЭС совершен ночью, когда люди спали. Сегодня атаки ВСУ на ЗАЭС и Энергодар продолжились. Удары наносились с применением РСЗО и тяжелой артиллерии с правого берега Днепра, с территории Днепропетровской области, населенных пунктов Никополь, Марганец, Томаковка, контролируемых Киевом. По данным администрации региона, ВСУ нацеливают ракеты на бетонные хранилища радиоактивных отходов. Пока попасть по ним и нанести серьезный ущерб Киеву не удается. Радиационный фон на ЗАЭС на данный момент в норме. Но если удары продолжатся, это только вопрос времени. Мы регулярно направляем в секретариат МАГАТЭ информационные бюллетени с подробным изложением ситуации и этих инцидентов. Господин председатель, происходящее в эти дни на ЗАЭС – кульминация преступных действий киевского режима против ядерной инфраструктуры и персонала, обслуживающего эти объекты, которые на протяжении месяцев оставались без какой-либо международной реакции. В период с апреля по июль Киев совершил целый ряд провокаций против ЗАЭС с использованием ударных БПЛА, в том числе польского производства. Часть из них удалось сбить. Часть, начиненные взрывчаткой беспилотники «Камикадзе», сдетонировали вблизи объектов критически важной инфраструктуры. Только по счастливой случайности это не привело к нарушению штатного режима работы станции. Ранее, в феврале, украинцами были захвачены 4 российских специалиста, сопровождавших поставку ядерного топлива на Ровенскую АЭС. Они подвергались запугиванию и давлению в русле классических методов из арсенала террористических группировок. 9 марта украинские диверсанты взорвали линию электропередач, питающую систему охлаждения хранилища отработавшего ядерного топлива на Чернобыльской атомной электростанции. Только благодаря усилиям российских военных удалось избежать аварии путем срочного подключения дизельных генераторов и обеспечения подачи электроэнергии на станцию по альтернативной линии электропередач с территории Беларуси. Диверсионная группа к тому же подорвала единственный мост, который связывал станцию с поселком энергетиков. Сменный персонал долгое время не мог выйти на работу. Параллельно его обрабатывали украинские спецслужбы, угрожая расправой за сотрудничество с оккупантами. А в Киеве в это время публично лили крокодильи слезы и докладывали в МАГАТЭ о том, что российские военные препятствуют ротации обслуживающих станции смен. На проходящей в настоящее время в Нью-Йорке 10-й обзорной конференции ГНЯО со стороны представителей киевского режима при поддержке ряда других делегаций звучат циничные и абсурдные обвинения в атаках на ЗАЭС в адрес России. Эти пропагандистские вбросы подхватывает западная пресса. Все это делается вопреки здравому смыслу, поскольку ЗАЭС контролируется российскими вооруженными силами. Элементарная логика подсказывает, что у наших военных нет никаких причин обстреливать ни станцию, ни город, ни самих себя. 4 марта этого года западные страны уже созывали Совет Безопасности по ситуации вокруг ЗАЭС, пытаясь представить украинскую диверсию, поджог зданий учебного центра как результат действий российских военных, при том, что станция к тому моменту находилась под их полным контролем. Напомню, что тогда заместитель генерального секретаря госпожа Ди Карло говорила, что атаки на ядерные объекты нарушают международное гуманитарное право. Представитель Великобритании, что международное право указывает на необходимость особой защиты ядерных объектов. Представитель США, что мир Божьей милостью избежал ядерной катастрофы, что нападение на станцию было чрезвычайно безрассудным шагом, что конфликты не должны затрагивать ядерные объекты. Представитель Франции утверждал, что необходимо гарантировать безопасность АЭС. Вы готовы повторить все это сейчас применительно к действиям украинской стороны и призвать Киев прекратить обстрелы? Хочу подчеркнуть, что каждый раз, когда ВСУ наносили удары по ЗАЭС, катастрофы удавалось избежать лишь благодаря самоотверженным совместным действиям работников станции и российских военнослужащих, оказывавших им всестороннюю экстренную помощь. Когда необходимы пожарные и аварийные расчеты, а также наши военнослужащие работают рука об руку. Это наглядно говорит о том, что между нашими военными и украинскими специалистами станции налажена абсолютно нормальная коммуникация. Господин председатель, мы с самого начала поддерживали усилия МАГАТЭ по обеспечению ядерной и физической ядерной безопасности ядерных объектов Украины. Предполагалось, что сформулированные гендиректором Гросси 7 принципов в этой сфере лягут в основу трехстороннего документа в формате России, Украины, МАГАТЭ. Однако киевский режим подписывать его отказался. Тогда мы проявили гибкость и согласились, чтобы такая договоренность была оформлена в виде двух параллельных соглашений – России с МАГАТЭ и Украины с МАГАТЭ. Киев отверг и такой вариант, не приведя никаких внятных доводов о причинах отказа. Впрочем, их суть понятна. Уже тогда в Киеве вынашивали опасные планы нарушить нормальное функционирование Запорожской и Чернобыльской АЭС и обвинить в этом Россию. Мы неукоснительно соблюдаем упомянутые 7 принципов и делаем все зависящее, чтобы представители агентства могли убедиться в этом своими глазами. Еще 3 июня этого года российской стороной и руководством секретариата МАГАТЭ был полностью согласован маршрут и график движения международной миссии агентства на Запорожскую атомную электростанцию. Возглавить эту миссию, в состав которой вошли видные специалисты из ряда стран, планировал личный гендиректор МАГАТЭ Гросси. Перед миссией были поставлены задачи исключительно технического характера. Они предусматривали выполнение мандата МАГАТЭ, оценку состояния крупнейшей в Европе атомной электростанции и инвентаризацию находящегося там ядерного материала, что предусмотрено соглашением о гарантии. В самом плотном взаимодействии с агентством нам удалось решить все непростые вопросы, связанные с организацией и проведением столь сложного в нынешних условиях мероприятия. Однако в последний момент красный свет был включен Департаментом безопасности секретариата ООН. Поездка была сорвана. Этим воспользовались власти в Киеве для усиления своих провокаций и обстрелов атомной станции. Убеждены, что отмена международной миссии сыграла на руку киевскому режиму и его западным кураторам, которые изначально были противниками этой поездки. Они не хотели, чтобы МАГАТЭ убедилась в нормальном штатном функционировании ЗАЭС и здоровой рабочей обстановке в коллективе станции. Рассчитываем, что визит экспертов МАГАТЭ на ЗАЭС в скором времени все же состоится. Надеемся, что в нынешней ситуации генеральный секретарь ООН осознает всю полноту своей ответственности и не станет через подотчетный ему департамент секретариата или другие звенья ООНовского механизма препятствовать проведению этой миссии. Со своей стороны готовы оказать максимально возможное содействие в решении всех организационных вопросов. Считаем оправданным, что представители МАГАТЭ прибыли на ЗАЭС как можно скорее, возможно, даже еще до конца августа. Однако далеко не все зависит от нас. Никаких гарантий, что поездка состоится, мы давать не можем. Нам сложно судить, что сегодня варится в голове у украинского руководства, которое несколько дней подряд наносит удары по ЗАЭС, при том, что генеральный секретарь ООН назвал любые атаки на ядерные объекты самоубийством. Считаем недопустимым, чтобы миссия МАГАТЭ проходила в условиях непрекращающихся обстрелов ВСУ станций и территории города Энергодар. Киев должен немедленно их прекратить и гарантировать отсутствие намерений создавать угрозу и жизни и здоровью международного персонала. Призываем государство, поддерживающее киевский режим, осадить своих подопечных, принудить их немедленно и навсегда прекратить атаки на ЗАЭС и жителей Энергодара и обеспечить безопасные условия для работы миссии МАГАТЭ. Призываем руководство ООН и МАГАТЭ проявить свое лидерство и глобальную ответственность и предельно четко, без дипломатических формул, указать на реальный источник угрозы ядерной безопасности ЗАЭС, а это удары по ней ВСУ, и заявить украинским властям о недопустимости таких действий. Это единственный способ предотвратить крупную радиационную катастрофу на европейском континенте, риск которой сейчас как никогда реален. Если атаки ВСУ продолжатся, она может произойти в любой момент. Тогда под угрозой радиоактивного заражения окажутся территории Киевской, Запорожской, Харьковской, Полтавской, Херсонской, Одесской, Николаевской, Кировоградской, Винницкой областей, Донецкой и Луганской народных республик, приграничный район России и Белоруссии, а также Молдавии, Болгарии и Румынии. И это еще самые оптимистичные экспертные прогнозы. Реальный же масштаб ядерной катастрофы на ЗАЭС даже сложно представить. Вся ответственность за это ляжет в таком случае на западных спонсоров Киева. Благодарю вас.
感谢俄罗斯代表的发言，下面请加纳代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, for his briefing on the deeply concerning situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. The information provided confirms our fears of a growing risk of a potential nuclear incident with catastrophic consequences for human lives and the environment if the indiscriminate shelling of the facility does not cease forthwith. Ghana unequivocally condemns the militarization of the precinct of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as well as the deliberate attacks on the power lines and sensitive units of the facility. It appears that the attacks are taking place with no due regard to the deadly consequences that these unacceptable actions could lead to, particularly the accidental emissions of radioactive material. We also call for the unconditional withdrawal and removal of all military personnel and equipment, and insist on the return of the facility to its accredited personnel. We welcome the public pronouncement of Secretary General Antonio Guterres regarding the rapidly developing grave situation, and hereby fully endorses his call for an immediate access to be granted to international inspectors from the IAEA to enable an independent assessment of the nuclear facility standards and safeguards of the facility. Under no circumstances should nuclear facilities intended for peaceful purposes be subjected to such attacks. We call for the immediate and full respect for the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment by all the armed parties. Mr. President, the world can ill afford another nuclear disaster. We cannot forget too soon the horrors of the 1986 Chernobyl accident and the consequent nuclear catastrophe, which left in its wake long-term effects of radiation exposure to many people in Ukraine and parts of Europe even to date. The warnings of the IAEA must therefore be soberly reflected on by this Council and should galvanize us to quickly deploy every effort in a unified manner to assist the IAEA to mitigate and suppress any risk of accidental emissions at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility. Ghana believes that ultimately the cessation of the military hostilities anchored on a complete and unconditional withdrawal of the troops of Russian Federation from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine is the only acceptable pathway to the restoration of the peace and security of Ukraine. In this regard, we continue to strongly urge a pacifist settlement of the substantive security concerns of the parties in line with the Charter and appeal to all other actors to refrain from escalatory actions and activities that only seeks to prolong the war, perpetuate the tensions, and aggravate the security concerns of the parties. Mr. President, As the senseless war lingers on, civilians are bearing innumerable hardships and human lives are being lost daily. It is important for the parties to exercise restraint and halt the use of force in all areas of critical infrastructure, including the nuclear power plants, and to respect their international obligations to protect human lives and to prevent a potential disaster. Admittedly, the war in Ukraine continues to have devastating consequences beyond the battlefield. The rippling effects, combined with the economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, have contributed to constrain the fiscal space of many governments and led to spiraling food prices, which threatens to push millions into acute hunger and roll back development gains. The situation of developing countries appears to be dire and require urgent actions on a global scale, including debt forgiveness and restructuring to assist them navigate the current volatile global economic environment in order to preserve their stability. It is hoped that this Council, together with the international community, could explore new support measures and appropriate responses to protect vulnerable populations in member states. I conclude by expressing Ghana's strong support for the peaceful resolution of this conflict sooner than later. We urge further constructive engagement by the parties at all levels in the pursuit of their security interests and the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you.
感谢加拿大代表的发言。我现在请美国负责军控和国际安全事务的副国务卿詹金斯女士发言。
Thank you, Director General Grossi, for your briefing on the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. We welcome the IAEA's steadfast commitment to addressing the situation there and to nuclear safety worldwide. The United States continues to closely monitor reports regarding the situation at the Zaporizhzhia facility, noting considerable concern regarding the risk of a nuclear incident that would endanger the people of Ukraine, neighboring states, and the international community. The cause of the situation at the Zaporizhzhia facility is not a mystery. It is another tragic result of the Russian Federation's decision to further invade its sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. Russia's full-scale invasion has resulted in thousands of civilians killed or wounded to date, and has violated the UN Charter and the principles of international law. The full-scale invasion has also contributed to a spike in global food insecurity, driven energy market volatility, and now heightened the risk of a catastrophic nuclear incident with consequences that could be felt in Ukraine and far beyond. It is especially galling that Russia's actions are taking place during the ongoing review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, being held just down the hall from where we sit. Russia's behavior could not more directly undercut the shared interests of the states parties in strengthening non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The solution for what is happening at the Zaporizhzhia facility is straightforward. The United States calls for the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine's territory. This would allow for Ukraine to restore the impeccable safety, security, and safeguards performance it upheld for decades at the facility. Russia continues to deploy disinformation to distract from the realities on the ground, and now claims that Ukraine is culpable for the situation at the Zaporizhzhia facility. This completely ignores the real issue, which is Russia's illegal presence at the facility. Russia alone created risks, and when it launched a full-scale invasion, and it can eliminate those risks now by withdrawing from Ukraine. In the absence of such a withdrawal, however, there are steps we must take now to minimize the risks. To start, the United States reiterates the importance of facilitating access for IAEA personnel to address nuclear safety, security, and safeguards concerns at the Zaporizhzhia facility, as well as at other nuclear facilities around the country, in a manner that respects Ukrainian sovereignty. This visit cannot wait any longer. We once again call on Russia to cease all military operations at or near Ukraine's nuclear facilities and insist that Russia immediately return full control of the Zaporizhzhia facility to Ukraine. We are also aware of claims of mistreatment of the power plant's Ukrainian staff by Russian soldiers, and note that, if true, such treatment would be inconsistent with the IAEA 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security, which Russia has endorsed. Ukrainian staff must be allowed to fulfill their important duties free from the pressure of Russia's armed forces. The United States also supports Ukraine's proposal to create a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia plant. Reports, such as that by the IAEA we heard today, underscore the urgency of the situation. But what is happening at this nuclear power plant is not the only alarming situation we face in the areas where Russia's forces operate in Ukraine. Russia has expanded its aims in Ukraine and seeks to dismantle it as a geopolitical entity, dissolving it from the world map. We are now getting a clearer picture of what life is like in an area under Russian military control. Through intimidation, censorship, and propaganda, Russia is clearly laying the foundation to try, once again, to illegally annex territory from its neighbor. None of us should be surprised if Russia suddenly announces false referenda in these regions as a pretext to grabbing more of Ukraine's sovereign territory. The many consequences of this conflict, including the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, will only end when Russia ends this war. Today, the United States demands particularly urgent action to address the nuclear risks posed by Russia's latest moves. This must be done through the work of the IAEA and a return of full control of the Zaporizhzhia facility to Ukraine. Thank you.
谢谢。下面我请嘉鹏代表发言。
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie le directeur général de l'IAEA, Monsieur Rafael Grossi, pour son exposé. Je voudrais d'emblée dire la grande préoccupation de mon pays face à l'intensification des combats et à la pérennisation de la guerre en Ukraine. Depuis samedi dernier, à la suite d'attaques visant la centrale nucléaire de Zaporizhzhia, les risques de catastrophes nucléaires sont visiblement devenus considérables avec la non-conformité à 5 des 7 principes garantissant la sécurité des sites nucléaires. La concentration d'une activité militaire autour du site nucléaire doit absolument cesser. Les parties ont la responsabilité de mettre fin à toute activité susceptible de faire courir au monde le risque d'une catastrophe nucléaire. Toute militarisation de sites nucléaires est inacceptable. L'ampleur des risques encourus doit interpeller tous les belligérants et l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. Nous exhortons les parties à se conformer aux règles de sécurité nucléaire en vigueur, à cesser tout bombardement visant les sites nucléaires et à éviter au monde le risque d'une catastrophe dont les conséquences seraient irréparables. Mon pays appelle les parties à coopérer avec l'IAEA pour sécuriser les sites potentiellement dangereux en vue de prévenir les risques de catastrophe. Il est en outre urgent que les 174 conteneurs de combustible nucléaire usés soient mis à l'abri des activités militaires de toutes sortes. À cet égard, une mission technique de l'IAEA sur site paraît indispensable. Nous appelons les parties à s'accorder sur les modalités d'une telle mission qui, d'après la situation qui vient de nous être exposée, est plus qu'urgente. Monsieur le Président, la signature d'un accord il y a quelques semaines en vue de l'exportation des céréales retenues dans les ports ukrainiens est un signe d'espoir sur la trajectoire vers la paix. Cet élan devrait être mis à profit pour envisager des négociations pour un cessez-le-feu en vue de négocier la fin des hostilités. Mon pays réitère son opposition à la guerre et réaffirme son attachement à la résolution pacifique des conflits. Nous encourageons tous les efforts politiques et diplomatiques visant à mettre fin à l'escalade et parvenir à un accord pour une paix durable entre les parties. Je vous remercie.
谢谢。下面请阿联酋代表发言。
Mr. President, I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his valuable briefing. The United Arab Emirates is deeply alarmed by recent events at and near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, including the reported damage to critical infrastructure, the external power supply system, and the radiation sensors. These developments illustrate the disastrous ramifications of the ongoing conflict, not just for Ukraine, but for the wider region and the world. When it comes to nuclear matters, our collective security is truly intertwined. A miscalculation, a mistake, a reckless act could result in a humanitarian and environmental catastrophe that would affect millions of lives. In this context, it is crucial that the IAEA have full, unimpeded access to the site in order to assess the damage and ascertain the safety of the facility. We support the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security outlined by Director General Grossi in the beginning of March, and remind parties of their importance in maintaining the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia plant and other facilities that may be caught up in the conflict. We further recall the special protections for nuclear power facilities under international law, including Article 56 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, which makes clear that works or installations containing dangerous forces, including nuclear generating stations, shall not be made the object of attack, even where these objects are military objectives. These facilities are protected under international law for a reason. Not only are they critical civilian infrastructure, but there are also immense risks to human life when nuclear facilities become vulnerable due to conflict. Ensuring the safety of nuclear facilities is therefore of the utmost importance and is a critical issue for the UAE. Mr. President, with the agreement on agricultural exports, we witness the potential for positive developments when backed by active and involved diplomacy and broad international support. The high stakes of nuclear safety and security and the international community's manifest concern should therefore make this a focus of constructive and necessary engagement between the parties. These efforts can in turn pave the path for a broader settlement that ends this devastating conflict. We therefore reiterate the need for ongoing dialogue to bring the conflict to a peaceful, sustainable resolution in a way that is consistent with the UN Charter and international law. We re-emphasize the importance of achieving a cessation of hostilities throughout Ukraine. The alarming developments at Zaporizhzhia underline the urgency of finding a diplomatic end to this conflict, which continues to cause a staggering humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. Despite the difficulties facing this council, we must work towards fulfilling its mandate and take incremental and pragmatic steps to prevent further suffering. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢阿联酋代表的发言，下面请挪威代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by thanking Director General Grossi for his briefing and for providing frequent, factual updates on matters within the agency's mandate. The Director General has outlined 7 indispensable pillars for nuclear safety and security. We note with great distress that the Russian forces have violated several of them during their military aggression against Ukraine. Norway strongly condemns Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, which has gone on for half a year. President, in March, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution deploring the Russian Federation's forcefully seizing control of nuclear facilities. The board expressed, and I quote, "grave concern that the Russian Federation's aggression is impeding the agency from fully and safely conducting safeguards verification activities at Ukrainian nuclear facilities," unquote. We call on Russia to return full control of all Ukrainian nuclear facilities to their Ukrainian operators. The ongoing war has disrupted direct communication lines between them and the Ukrainian regulator. This is extremely dangerous. Nuclear safety and security deteriorate from the presence of an armed aggressor. The staff operating the facilities are under psychological and physical stress, and they are at the mercy of an invading force. This is not conducive to the safe operation of nuclear facilities. Norway has had a long-standing cooperation with Ukraine on nuclear safety and security, and we commend Ukraine for its commitment and dedication to ensuring continuing nuclear safety and security in the country under these severe circumstances. President, damage to and destruction of civilian infrastructure is unacceptable. It must always be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law. We are concerned that Russia's occupation of nuclear power plants in Ukraine means also seizing control over the central sources of electricity for the Ukrainian civilian population. In closing, President, Norway again underlines that the Russian Federation must immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized borders and cease all threats and military actions. This would restore Ukraine's ability to ensure safe and secure operations at nuclear facilities. I thank you.
谢谢你的发言。下面请巴西代表发言。
Thank you. Mr. President, I thank Director Grossi for his clear and comprehensive briefing. Brazil has been following with great concern news about recent shelling incidents at the facilities of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. As unanimously recognized by the IAEA General Conference, any armed attack on and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency. We reiterate that all parties concerned have a responsibility to ensure compliance with the applicable instruments on nuclear safety and security, including the Convention on Nuclear Safety, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel, and the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. Mr. President, during the ongoing NPT review conference, the state parties have been insisting on the need to promote nuclear safety and security, as well as risk reduction. The urgency of translating those words into action is increasingly evident. While the IAEA assessment that there was no immediate threat to nuclear safety as a result of Saturday's incident give us some relief, we cannot lose sight of the fact that recent events have breached virtually all the 7 pillars outlined by the Director General Rafael Grossi earlier this year. The absence of immediate threat does not mean the absence of threat. It only means that the parties still have a chance to avoid a disaster. Mr. President, what makes the situation so alarming is precisely the fact that we are fully aware of the catastrophic and lasting consequences for human health and the environment that any damage to the Zaporizhzhia power plant would entail. We therefore call on all parties to refrain from any measure that could jeopardize the safety and security of the NPP as well as its safe operation. As DG Grossi recently stated, the current situation is untenable. We echo the calls for the deployment of an IAEA expert mission to the Zaporizhzhia NPP without delay. And I thank you.
谢谢你的发言。下面请阿尔巴尼亚代表发言。
Mr. President, we thank the IAEA Director General Grossi for his information, his clarifications, and for his leadership. He was crystal clear during his address at the general debate of the 10th NPT conference still going on, as he was today. IAEA should be fully involved everywhere in Ukraine in order to help prevent a nuclear disaster there. He must be listened to and his request must be met. Colleagues, there would not be a meeting of the Council and we would not be discussing this issue if it wasn't for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if this unjustified and senseless war that is continuing to this hour had not started. We and the entire world are now familiar with its disastrous impact on every aspect of human life and activity, including, as feared more than once, with increased nuclear risks with potentially disastrous consequences. Isn't it ironic that while the 10th review conference of the NPT is underway and the entire world hopes for tangible progress on the 3 pillars of the NPT, we meet, sadly, to talk about a persistent serious risk on the nuclear plant in Ukraine, which threatens Ukraine and its population, but not only its neighboring countries, but also the European continent and beyond. Let me recall one fundamental fact that is way more than a curiosity. Until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, no nuclear plant has been ever attacked, overrun, occupied, and reportedly militarized by an invading army. It is the first time that this is happening as a result of Russia's war of choice, and it has created one of the worst precedents. There is countless evidence that Russian forces have been and continue to conduct their ugly war recklessly and with brutality. There is a legitimate concern, therefore, that Russian forces may directly or indirectly cause a serious or severe nuclear accident and take other actions that may result in the exposure of Ukraine's population to ionizing radiation, all while accusing the victims as victims of such actions. Such dreadful concerns have been validated by the shelling of a nuclear research institute in Kharkiv, as well as by overrunning and occupying Europe's biggest nuclear power station at Zaporizhzhia. In the course of the last 6 months of the war, Russia has carried out indiscriminate ground and air attacks upon civil infrastructure at residential areas, causing thousands of innocent victims. Further, cyber warfare against targets in Ukraine, including electric power grid installations and systems, have reportedly been linked with Russian actors and interests. Making full clarity on the situation on the power plant in Zaporizhzhia is critical, and this must be carried out through the international eyes, meaning the IAEA missions. Colleagues, Russia's action constitutes a serious and irresponsible breach of nuclear safety rules and are another example of its blatant disregard for international law and international norms. They undermine the IAEA's ability to monitor Ukraine's peaceful nuclear activities for safeguarding purposes. As rightly stated by the G7 foreign ministers recently, and I quote, "It is Russia's continued control of the plant that endangers the region. Therefore, the longer the war continues, the greater the likelihood that additional nuclear challenges and risk may arise related to the need of Ukraine's nuclear energy program for equipment maintenance and other related issues which would not be conducted normally just because of the war." Albania reiterates its full and continued support for the IAEA and for its staff to be able to access all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, safe and without impediment, and engage directly and without interference with the Ukrainian personnel responsible for the operation of these facilities. The safety of all individuals implementing those efforts must be addressed to strengthen nuclear safety, security, and safeguards in Ukraine. Albania condemns any act of violence perpetrated inside or near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or against its personnel. Ukrainian personnel operating the plant under Russian occupation must be able to carry out their important tasks without restriction, threats, or pressure. Unfortunately, as we have seen, the 7 safety pillars essential to maintaining nuclear safety and security, defined at the start of the war by the IAEA, have all been compromised at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We reiterate our call on the Russian Federation to stop the war and immediately withdraw all its armed forces from Ukrainian nuclear facilities and from the entire Ukrainian territory. Let me conclude, like others, because it's important, Mr. President, by recalling what Director General Grossi has said repeatedly, including at the GA. If an accident occurs at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, we will not have a natural disaster to blame. We'll only have ourselves to answer to. Actually, we know who is to be blamed, but we hope we will never come to it. And for this, there is need for concrete action, since inaction is unconscionable. Nuclear safety should not be compromised. It should not be politicized, and it should not be used for military tactic advantages. This is not a time for empty words, for biased narratives or blame game, but for the immediate and strict application of the IAEA safety procedures and protocols in Ukraine. I thank you.
我谢谢你的发言，下面请印度代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Director General Rafael Grossi for his update, focusing on the safety and security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. We continue to carefully follow developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear power reactors and facilities. India attaches high importance to ensuring the safety and security of these facilities, as any accident involving nuclear facilities could potentially have serious consequences for public health and the environment. We also accord high priority to the discharge by the International Atomic Energy Agency of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, non-discriminatory, and efficient manner. And we value the efforts of the agency in this regard. We have noted the latest information available with regard to the nuclear power plants and facilities in Ukraine, including the updates published on 9 and 10 August by the IAEA, as well as today's updates on latest developments. India expresses its concern over the reports of shelling near the spent fuel storage facility of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We call for mutual restraint so as not to endanger the safety and security of nuclear facilities. Mr. President, India continues to remain concerned over the situation in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict, India has consistently called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to violence. We've called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. We support all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. While we are discussing the nuclear dimension of this conflict, we need also to be acutely cognizant of the impact of the Ukraine conflict on developing countries, particularly on the supply of food grains, fertilizer, and fuel. It is important for all of us to appreciate the importance of equity, affordability, and accessibility when it comes to food grains. Open markets must not become an argument to perpetuate inequity and promote discrimination. In this regard, we welcome the Secretary-General-backed initiative to open the export of grains from Ukraine via the Black Sea and the facilitation of the exports of Russian food and fertilizers. These efforts demonstrate that differences can be resolved through sustained dialogue and diplomacy, which has been the consistent position of India. Finally, Mr. President, we would continue to reiterate that the global order should be anchored on international law, the UN Charter, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of nation states. Thank you.
谢谢你的发言。下面请肯尼亚代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, for his briefing. We are having a discussion on the backdrop of the 10th Review Conference of the parties of NPT happening in these premises. The objective of this treaty is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and further, the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general complete disarmament. We are all alive to the fact that the use of these weapons, whether intentional or accidental, can have an apocalyptic effect on humanity, biodiversity, and the environment. Kenya, therefore, reaffirms its belief that the total elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only absolute guarantee against the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. In this regard, we are deeply concerned by the reports of shelling of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We note with relief that no damage was caused to the reactors themselves, nor was there any radiological release or reports of injuries, fully aware of the catastrophic effects of a stray or deliberate targeting of such an installation. We urge the need to safeguard the 7 indispensable pillars of nuclear safety and security as echoed by the Director General. We further urge the parties to refrain from any military action that could jeopardize nuclear safety and security in Ukraine. It is also essential that the IAEA be allowed to send a mission of nuclear safety, security, and safeguards experts to the site as soon as possible to conduct safeguards verification activities. Mr. President, beyond the dangers posed by an insecure nuclear power plant, Kenya remains concerned by the unabated strikes and shelling in various parts of Ukraine. With no meaningful ceasefire in sight, this war continues to cause untold suffering to the Ukrainian people. It also threatens to usher in a new era of major global war. Kenya continues to call for restraint from any actions that may further escalate the situation. And we reiterate the need to shift focus to an immediate cessation and the deployment of available diplomatic tools. Such cessation should set the foundation for the negotiation of a lasting peace settlement that guarantees the sovereignty, territorial integrity of Ukraine, while taking into consideration the security concerns of Russian Federation. Finally, Mr. President, I reaffirm Kenya's respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
谢谢你的发言。下面请法国代表发言。
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et je remercie le Directeur général de l'IAEA pour sa présentation. Monsieur le Président, la France est très préoccupée par la menace grave qui pèse sur la sûreté et la sécurité des installations nucléaires ukrainiennes. La centrale de Zaporizhzhia, la plus grande d'Europe, a été saisie de force par la Russie au mois de mars dernier dans le cadre de son agression injustifiée et injustifiable contre l'Ukraine. La présence et les actions des forces armées russes à proximité de la centrale augmentent significativement le risque d'un accident aux conséquences potentiellement dévastatrices. La Russie porte la responsabilité de cette situation. La Russie doit rendre à l'Ukraine le plein contrôle de la centrale nucléaire de Zaporizhzhia, ainsi que de toutes les installations nucléaires d'Ukraine. Et comme l'a souligné le secrétaire général aujourd'hui, tous les personnels et tous les matériels militaires doivent être retirés instamment de la centrale. Le personnel ukrainien qui exploite la centrale doit pouvoir assumer ses missions sans menace et sans pression. Le contrôle d'installations nucléaires ukrainiennes par la Russie est un danger pour le peuple ukrainien, un danger pour la région et pour l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. Monsieur le Président, la France salue et soutient les efforts qui sont déployés par le directeur général de l'IAEA. Elle l'a appuyé dès le début, à haut niveau, et notamment en contribuant activement à son plan d'assistance technique à l'Ukraine. La France rappelle l'importance des 7 piliers de la sûreté et de la sécurité nucléaire qui ont été définis par le directeur de l'IAEA. Ils doivent être respectés. La capacité de l'IAEA à contrôler les activités nucléaires pacifiques de l'Ukraine pour assurer le respect des garanties, également compromises par les actions de la Russie, doit également être rétablie. C'est pourquoi je tiens à souligner ici l'importance de faciliter une mission des experts de l'IAEA à la centrale de Zaporizhzhia. Cette mission doit porter sur la sûreté et la sécurité nucléaire. Elle doit permettre la tenue des inspections nécessaires au titre des garanties. Elle doit se faire dans le respect de la pleine souveraineté de l'Ukraine sur son territoire et sur ses infrastructures. Au-delà, le personnel de l'IAEA doit pouvoir accéder à l'ensemble des installations nucléaires de l'Ukraine en toute sûreté et sans obstacle. L'agence doit pouvoir communiquer directement sans ingérence avec le personnel ukrainien qui est chargé de l'exploitation de ces installations. Monsieur le Président, la France réitère son soutien indéfectible à l'indépendance, à la souveraineté et à l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine dans ses frontières internationalement reconnues. Depuis le 24 février, nous avons été témoins du coût humain dévastateur de l'agression russe. La Russie doit retirer immédiatement ses troupes du territoire de l'Ukraine. Elle doit cesser sa dangereuse fuite en avant. Je vous remercie.
谢谢法国代表的发言。下面请墨西哥代表发言。
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos la convocatoria a esta sesión informativa del Consejo de Seguridad, así como al director general del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica, Rafael Grossi, por su presentación en relación a la crítica situación de la planta nuclear de Zaporizhzhia. Las declaraciones del regulador de la planta nuclear sobre los efectos de los ataques que tuvieron lugar el fin de semana pasado son motivo de gran preocupación en efecto. A nadie escapa que un accidente nuclear tendrá consecuencias devastadoras a escala internacional. Precisamente por eso reiteramos sin ambigüedad alguna que cualquier ataque contra instalaciones nucleares es inaceptable, en línea con lo que fue establecido por la Conferencia General de 2009 del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica. Cualquier ataque o amenaza contra instalaciones nucleares dedicadas a fines pacíficos constituye una violación a los principios de la Carta de la ONU, al derecho internacional y al propio estatuto de la agencia. Igualmente, dichos ataques son violatorios del derecho internacional humanitario, incluidos los convenios de Ginebra de 1949 y su protocolo adicional 1 de 1977, que fueron ratificados por las partes en conflicto, por lo que éstas no tendrían justificación alguna para no acatarlos. La situación que impera en Zaporizhzhia en los últimos días es parte de un deplorable patrón de ataques contra infraestructura civil. México exhorta a respetar la obligación de no atacar objetivos civiles y esto incluye, por supuesto, no llevar a cabo ataques indiscriminados o desproporcionados. El derecho internacional humanitario y las convenciones sobre seguridad física nuclear deben respetarse sin excepción. Como lo señaló el director general Grossi, nos encontramos ante un riesgo real de desastre nuclear. Las consecuencias humanitarias de ello serían catastróficas tanto para la salud humana como para el medio ambiente. Hacemos eco del llamado del secretario general para que se permita a la brevedad una inspección por parte de la IAEA a la planta de Zaporizhzhia. Instamos a no poner obstáculos o condiciones para permitir tales inspecciones. Dicha misión es la que nos va a proveer de la información objetiva, veraz e independiente sobre las condiciones que privan en la planta y que es urgente conocer. Concluyo reiterando nuestro respaldo a los esfuerzos del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica por generar condiciones para la estabilización de la planta e instamos a su director general a seguir manteniendo informado a este Consejo sobre los desarrollos en materia de seguridad nuclear en Ucrania como lo ha hecho. Finalmente, lo que estas graves vicisitudes muestran una vez más es que urge buscar una solución diplomática al conflicto que conduzca al cese de las hostilidades. Gracias, presidente.
感谢墨西哥代表的发言，下面请爱尔兰代表发言。
Thank you, President, and I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his briefing. The IAEA has an indispensable role in supporting Ukraine to ensure nuclear safety and security at all facilities in that country, especially since Russia's invasion, and you have our full backing in your work. President, Ireland is deeply concerned by the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the strong risk of a radiological accident or incident arising from military activity at the site. Such an incident could have devastating consequences for the people of Ukraine, who have already suffered so much from the actions of the Russian Federation. It would also have serious consequences for the wider region. Let us make no mistake. The issues at Zaporizhzhia arise solely from the unjust and unprovoked war waged by Russia against Ukraine. The reckless actions of the Russian military forces in Ukraine have already demonstrated their utter disregard for nuclear safety and security, including in their violent, illegal seizure and occupation of the Zaporizhzhia facility. Their actions raise real fears of a significant radiological, chemical, or biological accident in Ukraine. Director General Grossi has previously set out the basic principles of nuclear safety and security that should be respected. We call on Russia, and indeed all states, to commit themselves to these 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security regarding peaceful nuclear facilities and materials in all circumstances, including in situations of armed conflict. President, while we meet here today, in other parts of this building, delegates are gathered for the review conference on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The NPT forms the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. Russia's actions in Ukraine risk undermining all 3 pillars of work under this important treaty. We urge the Russian Federation not to violate or undermine such essential multilateral instruments upon which our collective security depends. President, in calling for today's discussion, Russia is seeking to avoid its responsibilities and to distract from what is really happening because of its unjustified and unprovoked war on Ukraine. We again urge the Russian Federation to stop using the Security Council to try to advance its campaigns of disinformation. If Russia is serious about safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, what it needs to do is clear: end its illegal occupation of the site, withdraw its troops and munitions, so that the Ukrainian authorities, with the IAEA, can uphold their responsibilities for safety and security at the site. The IAEA Board of Governors has also set this out in its resolution at its special session in March. Finally, President, Ireland calls again on Russia to end its brutal war against the Ukrainian people and withdraw its troops from the entire internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, and to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbours. Thank you.
谢谢。下面请英国代表发言。
Thank you, President, and thank you, Director General Grossi, for briefing us once again on the situation in Ukraine. The United Kingdom remains deeply concerned about the ongoing impacts of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and, in the context of today's meeting, its effects on nuclear safety. The Council discussed Russia's reckless actions at the Ukrainian nuclear facilities, including Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia, at the start of the invasion. On the 3rd of March, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution calling for Russia to cease all actions against and at all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, so that the competent Ukrainian authorities could regain full control and ensure their safe and secure operation, and the IAEA could resume their important safeguards verification activities. Now, over 5 months later, Russia's control of the Zaporizhzhia plant continues. The competent Ukrainian authorities and IAEA inspectors are still prevented from properly carrying out their essential duties. As Director General Grossi has said, Russia's actions have violated almost all of his 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security. Russia's actions are contrary to the principles of the Convention on Nuclear Safety and other international nuclear safety conventions, and they put at jeopardy the safety of millions who would be affected by a nuclear incident in Ukraine. President, in light of this, and despite Russia's continued lies and obfuscation in this chamber about its brutal and irresponsible assault, we should be clear. It is Russia's continued invasion and military presence that is putting the plant at risk and thereby endangering the local population, the wider region, and the entire international community. President, we welcome Director General Grossi's efforts to strengthen nuclear safety and security in Ukraine in challenging circumstances, and the tireless, heroic efforts of the Ukrainian nuclear facilities staff, despite the immense pressure they are under. We reiterate our call for IAEA inspectors to be permitted access to all nuclear facilities in Ukraine to address nuclear safety, security, and safeguard concerns in a manner that respects Ukraine's sovereignty over its territory and infrastructure. In this regard, we note with appreciation Foreign Minister Kuleba's letter to Mr. Grossi and the Secretary General on this issue. And we once again call on Russia immediately to withdraw its forces from Ukraine and return full control of all Ukraine's nuclear facilities to their rightful sovereign owner to ensure their safe and secure operation. Thank you.
我谢谢你的发言。我现在以中国代表的身份发言。各位同事，我同样感谢格罗西总干事刚才所做的通报。中方高度关注乌克兰境内核设施安全和安保问题，对近期发生的扎波罗热核电站遇袭事件深表关切。根据国际原子能机构从乌克兰核监管当局获取的信息，袭击事件没有对核安全造成直接的威胁，辐射数值尚处于正常水平。待袭击对核电站的设施完整性、安全和安保系统、电力供应和人员安全造成损害，给国际社会拉响了核警报。核设施的安全和安保问题不容试错。扎波罗热核电站是欧洲最大的核电站之一，一旦发生大规模核事故，恐将比福岛核事故 更加严重。福岛核事故产生的大量放射性物质泄漏，以及核污染水对海洋环境、食品安全和人类健康产生深远影响，引发广泛关注和关切。中方不希望同样的风险重演。我们呼吁有关当事方保持克制、谨慎行事，避免采取危及核安全、核安保的行动，尽一切努力减少意外事件发生。中方一贯支持国际原子能机构在促进核安全、核安保问题上发挥积极作用，并严格按照授权履行保障监督职责。我们注意到，格罗西总干事和国际原子能机构专家团队一直计划前往扎波罗热核电站。古特雷斯秘书长也为此发出呼吁。俄罗斯承诺为访问提供必要协助。我们也注意到，乌克兰在8月9日致格罗西总干事和古特雷斯秘书长的信中，强调组织访问团的必要性日益增加。我们希望能够尽快消除有关障碍。格罗西总干事和国际原子能机构专家团队得以早日成型，顺利开展工作。各位同事，乌克兰危机持续5个多月，冲突对核设施构成的安全风险始终存在。只有推动局势降温，早日恢复和平，才能从根本上解除核风险，减少误判，避免出现意外。我们再次呼吁有关各方尽快恢复谈判，本着冷静、理性态度，寻找乌克兰危机的解决出路，解决彼此合理安全关切，构建均衡、有效、可持续的安全框架，实现共同安全。国际社会，中方一贯主张遵守联合国宪章宗旨和原则，尊重国家主权和领土完整。我们呼吁国际社会所有各方以负责任的方式推动危机得到妥善解决，都应加大政治和外交努力，为当事方重回谈判创造条件。中方将继续为此发挥建设性作用。我现在继续行使安理会主席的职能。我现在请俄罗斯代表发言。
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Сегодня вновь никто из наших Наши западные коллеги уже давно выбрали беспроигрышную, как они полагают, тактику при обсуждении различных сюжетов вокруг Украины. Скоординированно перекладывать на Россию ответственность за все, что происходит в зоне боевых действий. Любая, даже гипотетическая вина Киева ими отметается априори. Так было с провокациями в Буче, в Ирпене, Краматорске. Кстати, не подскажете мне, а почему с радаров совершенно исчезло упоминание событий в Краматорске, где на вокзале погибло свыше 50 человек от удара реактивных систем залпового огня? Да потому что это были украинские ракеты «Град» с украинскими серийными номерами ВСУ, и опровергнуть это невозможно. В вышедшем недавно докладе Amnesty International, организации, которые трудно причислить к пророссийским, констатируется то, о чем мы говорили на каждом заседании по Украине с самого начала специальной военной операции. Вооруженные силы Украины и украинские националистические батальоны прикрываются мирным населением как живым щитом, используют жилые дома и квартиры в них как огневые точки, размещают тяжелую технику и артиллерию у больниц, школ и детских садов. Какая волна негодования поднялась в связи с этим на Западе? Как посмела Amnesty International обвинить в чем-то украинскую сторону? О Киеве как поговорке: либо хорошо, либо ничего. Either good or nothing. На практике это означает, что у Киева по-прежнему карт-бланш на любые преступления. Вместо того, чтобы называть вещи своими именами, вы демонстрируете вопиющие двойные стандарты и чудеса изворотливости, чтобы не бросить и тени ответственности на Киев, вина которого за обстрелы очевидна. В этом проявляется ваша безответственность. Вы демонстрируете неспособность брать на себя ответственность за глобальные проблемы, если они расходятся с вашими узкокорыстными геополитическими интересами. В случае с Запорожской АЭС мы наблюдали, как в западных умах со скрипом рождалась их версия событий. Ответственность за обстрелы Запорожской атомной электростанции несет кто? Ну, конечно же, российская сторона. Мы видели эти неуклюжие заявления. Сегодня, правда, вы, за небольшим исключением некоторых особых зелотов, обошлись без этих абсурдных домыслов. Уж слишком они абсурдны, чтобы звучать из уст взрослых, солидных людей, сидящих в этом зале. Но нас поражает безответственность европейских политических элит, которые в своей безоговорочной и иррациональной поддержке Киева ставят под угрозу безопасность собственных граждан. Впору поставить вопрос о наличии этих элит здравого смысла. Призываем вас, коллеги, донести до своих лидеров необходимость повлиять на киевский режим и заставить его прекратить безрассудные удары по Запорожской атомной электростанции, которые фактически делают заложниками жителей европейских государств. Ответственность за это лежит в том числе и на вас, дамы и господа. С сожалением отмечаем, что и секретариат ООН не в состоянии дать трезвую оценку ситуации. Мы слышим заявления, в том числе из уст генерального секретаря ООН, что, мол, цитирую, станция может подвергнуться атаке или стать базой для нанесения атак, и призывы ее демилитаризовать. Россия не использует объекты гражданской инфраструктуры, не говоря уже о ядерных объектах в военных целях. Это тактика украинских вооруженных сил, которые в нарушение норм международного гуманитарного права размещают боевые позиции вблизи гражданских объектов, прикрываясь мирными жителями как живым щитом. Российские военные обеспечивают охрану Запорожской АЭС, день за днем отражая атаки киевского режима на этот ядерный объект, как я уже сказал, в слаженной координации с персоналом станции. Благодаря их усилиям пока удается защитить ключевые объекты станции и предотвратить ядерную катастрофу. На что способен киевский режим, мы знаем, и мир уже смог в этом убедиться. Те, кто предлагает вывод российских войск, должны отдавать себе отчет в последствиях того, что этот объект останется без защиты и может быть использован Киевом и националистическими группировками для самых чудовищных провокаций. Благодарю вас.
谢谢。美国代表要求再次发言，下面请美国代表发言。美国代表要求再次发言，下面请美国代表发言。
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief. I don't really want to repeat everything that I have already said before. I just want to again appeal to Russia to end its seizure of the Zaporizhzhia power plant and return control of the facility to the government of Ukraine. We will then see how quickly stability returns to the facility. Thank you, Mr. President.
谢谢。下面请英国代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I will also be brief. So to call a spade, let's just be very clear here. There would be no risk to nuclear safety without the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, an invasion that has caused countless civilian lives and an incident at a nuclear facility which exists precisely because Russia has carried out that invasion. Thank you.
谢谢。如果安理会成员没有要求发言的了，那么下面我们将请根据议事规则第37条出席会议的代表发言。下面我请乌克兰代表发言。
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, and I also recognize here the representative of terrorist Russia in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. Just half a year ago, one could hardly imagine a situation when the biggest nuclear power station in Europe is seized following an armed attack with the use of tanks and artillery, and then packed with military personnel and weaponry. The weaponry that is used to shell Ukrainian cities and villages across the Dnipro River. It is a matter of alarm that in order to divert attention from these practices, Russia has resorted to dangerous provocations, staged shelling of the NPP itself. The Russians are well known for their elaborate plans of deceit, sabotage, and cover-ups, like the one we witnessed today. A conclusion one may draw from today's torrent of deception by the Russian envoy is that when they realized that their plan had collapsed like a house of cards, Russia decided to go for broke and call for this meeting. This call looks especially cynical considering their most recent attack on the facility, which happened earlier today and directly endangered both the plant facilities and personnel. I would like to thank Director General Grossi for his briefing. He has provided us with a comprehensive update on the current situation that makes it clear that the only way to ultimately remove the nuclear threats stemming from the illegal Russian presence at the nuclear power plant is the withdrawal of the Russian troops and the return of the station to the legitimate control of Ukraine. Mr. President, Ukraine highly appreciates the efforts of the IAEA and the UN to ensure the safety and security of the Ukrainian nuclear facilities against the backdrop of the Russian invasion. As Zaporizhzhia NPP has been occupied since March the 4th, with its personnel working at gunpoint, Ukraine has been in close consultation with the IAEA about the matter. We have always underlined the importance of the full and consistent implementation by the agency of its mandate. In this regard, since the beginning of Russia's occupation of ZNPP, Ukraine has insisted on the need to send a mission to the site and negotiated its modalities with the agency. We deeply regret, therefore, that such a visit has not yet taken place due to the destructive Russian position. Despite their public declarations, the occupiers have resorted to manipulation and unjustified conditions on the mission's visit, as well as shelling of the ZNPP and Energodar, thus making the visit impossible so far. We strongly reject the attempts by Russia to escape responsibility for the delay by blaming Ukraine, by blaming the United Nations Secretary General, by blaming the UN Secretariat, as was the case not only today, but also with the Russian Foreign Ministry statement of August the 9th. This prompted Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba to reiterate the extreme importance of conducting the agency's-led international mission to the site in its letter to the agency's Director General and the UN Secretary General sent on August the 9th. We welcome the readiness of the agency's Director General expressed during this briefing to send the mission led by the agency to the occupied ZNPP, which should be conducted in strict compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and with full respect of its international obligations. We stand ready to provide the mission with all necessary assistance and facilitate its travel through Ukrainian-controlled territory. Ladies and gentlemen, let it be known that the distance between Ukraine's controlled bank of the Dnieper River and the Zaporizhzhia NPP that sits on the opposite side of the river is 5 miles. 5 miles. Be it from Nikopol or from Marganets. If Russia stops shelling these cities, what in the world will prevent the mission to cover these 5 miles? In light of the continued militarization of the ZNPP site by the Russian armed forces, its shelling and subsequent damage to and mining of certain areas of the site, it is imperative that such a mission has qualified experts in the military dimension. This can be achieved by including those experts in the mission team. Ukraine also sees a lot of added value in drawing upon relevant and extensive UN political expertise. The UN representatives will be able to make a significant contribution to the preparation of the mission's final report, thus outlining the military dimension of the critical threats and challenges to nuclear safety, security, and safeguards at the ZNPP site, stemming from its occupation and militarization by the Russian armed forces. Mr. President, it is absolutely clear that the provocative Russian practices of shelling the ZNPP and the city of Energodar pose an unprecedented threat to nuclear security for Ukraine, Europe, and the world as a whole. Russia must strictly abide by the laws and customs of war, including those relating to nuclear facilities. The shelling that took place on August the 6th shed light on how these provocations are arranged. In particular, Russian occupants present at the site at the time of the shelling, in total about 500 soldiers and Rosatom representatives, took shelter in advance before the shelling began, while the local employees were wounded. It also speaks volumes that Russian military hardware deployed at the NPP was hidden in the powerhouses at the first and second reactors. The shelling damaged 3 radiation monitoring detectors at the dry spent fuel storage facility site, which made impossible early detection and timely response in the event of deterioration of the radiological situation or release of radiation from the spent fuel containers. On August the 7th, the Russian armed forces again resorted to shelling the Zaporizhzhia NPP site and damaged the 750 kilovolt overhead line ZNPP Kakhovska substation. As a result of the shelling, a safety trip was activated at one of the power units. Currently, this power unit is being cooled down. Consequently, there is only one remaining direction of power delivery at the Zaporizhzhia NPP. Should this last line be damaged, the Zaporizhzhia NPP will be totally de-energized. Russian plans regarding the Zaporizhzhia NPP aim at disconnecting it from the energy system of Ukraine and cutting off electricity in the south of the country. Earlier, the Russian occupiers also mined the Zaporizhzhia NPP outside the cooling pond and the banks of Kakhovka Reservoir, which borders the plant. Moreover, the Russian armed forces are using the plant as cover for shelling the Ukraine-controlled cities located on the opposite side of the Dnieper River, especially Marganets and Nikopol, with multiple launch rocket systems. Under these circumstances, the Ukrainian personnel of the Zaporizhzhia NPP continue to do their best to ensure nuclear and radiation safety, as well as to mitigate the consequences of the Russian shelling. Dear colleagues, let me underline that the Russian actions at and against Zaporizhzhia NPP completely violate practically all 7 indispensable pillars of safety and security outlined by the Director General at a meeting of the Agency Board of Governors on the 2nd of March. We demand that Russia fully implement the resolution of the Agency Board of Governors dated March the 3rd, the safety, security, and safeguards implications of the situation in Ukraine. Russia must immediately cease all actions against nuclear facilities in Ukraine and return control over all seized nuclear facilities to the Ukrainian side. The international community must continue political pressure on the aggressor state of Russia and demand full and unconditional deoccupation of the ZNPP. Ensuring the safety and security of nuclear facility cannot be seen as a goodwill gesture. This is the duty of an occupying power in accordance with international humanitarian law. Now, let me explain it to the Russian ambassador in the simplest way, step by step, in a way that even a school kid could understand. First, state it loud and clear that Russia allows an IAEA-led mission immediately and unconditionally. Do not obstruct the trip of 5 miles across the river. Second, demine the facilities of the ZNPP. Third, remove your military personnel and withdraw your weaponry. Enough games. Dear colleagues, none of us can stop the wind if it carries radiation. But together, we are capable of stopping a terrorist state. And the sooner we stop Russia, the sooner Europe and the world will be able to feel safe again. Thank you.
谢谢你的发言。下面请俄罗斯代表发言。
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Я не планирую вступать в полемику с представителем киевского режима и реагировать на его потоки сознания лжи, которые он сегодня здесь с нами поделился. По поводу миссии МАГАТЭ, сорванной в свое время Киевом, я рекомендую перечитать наше выступление. Там все сказано предельно четко и ясно. Я хочу обратить внимание на другое, что представитель киевского режима единственный на сегодняшнем заседании, даже исключая покровителей Киева, утверждал, что это Россия обстреливает контролируемую ею же станцию, Запорожскую атомную электростанцию и город Энергодар, в котором проживают в том числе сотрудники станции. Я хочу привлечь ваше внимание к этому заявлению украинской стороны. Для протокола, так сказать. Благодарю вас.
谢谢你的发言。国际原子能机构总干事格罗西先生希望在会议结束之前再做一个简短的发言。下面我请他发言。
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity for a very, very succinct closing remark. I want to thank all members of the Council for their interventions, which are very important for us at the IAEA to comprehend, to understand even better how they see things. Of course, it is not our remit to get into the political considerations, and we recognize the obvious differences that exist. But there is something very important that I, at least personally, take from this meeting. There is a common denominator here in this room, there in New York. Everybody agrees that nuclear safety and security must be preserved. Everybody agrees and supports the 7 pillars for nuclear safety and security. And everybody believes that this mission must take place. So it's no longer a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. The when must be as soon as possible. It's only the how that needs to be addressed. And I, as I indicated in my initial briefing, I am consulting and I will be intensifying my consultations with Ukraine, with the Russian Federation, of course, the United Nations, through the United Nations Department for Safety and Security must be involved in all of this, so we can conduct the mission which is so badly needed. And I will be, of course, after that or at any other moment, Mr. President, at the disposal of the Security Council to continue briefing on our function, our mission to support Ukraine this important hour and to restore complete safety and security around all the facilities in the country. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
我也再次感谢格罗西先生的发言，感谢他到安理会来介绍情况。现在在发言名单上没有其他人要求发言了，那么现在休会。
Sticker, headset. Hey, Anthony, headset. Hey, Tyler, headset.
Meetings